everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am here with a short, fun book tag. Because the end of the school year is approaching and I am definitely counting down to it, I apologize to keep yammering on about that, but this has truly been the worst year I have taught in my 10 years of teaching. I thought I would try the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 book tag, which I could not find the original creator, but I will link the creator whose channel I first saw it on down below. And yes, it's 5 different categories, counting down the number of items you have to name. Pretty self-explanatory. Let's get into it. The first category is name 5 5-star reads from this year. And I had to look back through my reading spreadsheet for this year. I'm honestly very stingy with 5-star ratings. I don't know why. I have this weird complex about rating things 5 stars. But here are 5 that I managed to scrounge up. The first is The Last Chronicle of Barset by Anthony Trollope. This book was incredible. The entire series is really quite cozy and sweet, and I've enjoyed the rest of the books. But the way he manages to weave all of those characters and all of those plot lines together for this final book feels very modern, and it was just done perfectly. I highly, highly recommend it. I also rated Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens 5 stars. This is beautiful. It's fantastically written. Very literary, but not such that you can't understand it. It's literary, but very accessible. And it was fantastic. It's the story of Chopin and Georges Sand moving into a villa in somewhere in the south of Spain, but told from the perspective of the ghost of a teenage girl who died there hundreds of years before. We find out more about her previous life, more about the life of Georges Sand and Chopin and her children, and the ghost, Blanca, is starting to fall in love with Georges Sand. It's fantastic. A very strange premise, but fantastic. My next 5-star read was actually my first read of the year, and that was The Gentleman's Gambit by Evie Dunmore. Again, I recommend this entire series. They are really beautifully done. These are spicy romance books set in the Victorian era, usually around Oxford. Sometimes they travel outside. And on a group of 4 women in particular who are part of the suffragette movement. And each book follows one of those 4 friends. This one follows Lady Katrina as she is forced to play host to this scholar coming in from Lebanon, I believe. It uses a bit of enemies to lovers. Lady Katrina is also drawn as definitely anxious, possibly neurodivergent due to being so gifted. There is a social justice element to why Mr. Corey has come to Oxford. It's so beautifully done. I really, really loved it. Another favorite read of this year so far has been The Winter Rose by Jennifer Donnelly. I'm going to read The Wild Rose later this year, but this book was fantastic. Again, it's a sequel. You do have to read The Tea Rose first. That does introduce some characters who are still here in The Winter Rose. But it's a series that follows a variety of characters around mainly London. The Tea Rose went to New York as well during the late Victorian Edwardian era. It's that turn of the century area, give or take about 20 years. This was fantastic. It followed either new characters or characters who had been minor characters in the Tea Rose, but the main characters of the Tea Rose are also very much present in this book. Not only was there a fantastic romance plot, there was an incredible look at the social justice area of medicine during this time in London. looking at different ethnic neighborhoods of London, specifically the Jewish community in London at the time, as well as Irish immigrants, all of those other various immigrant populations. There were characters that you absolutely hated. They were vile. But much like Game of Thrones, you understood why they were doing what they were doing, even if you hated them for it. It was so believable. Ultimately, does have a happy ending. High stakes, but you don't want to stop reading. It never pushed my anxiety to a level where I had to step away. It's fantastic. Highly, highly worth a read. And then finally, how could I not have adored Judi Dench's Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent? This is a fascinating look into Judy's life, into the way she shapes a character, and is a love letter to Shakespeare. How could I not love that? That is everything that I want out of a book. 4 auto-buy authors. At first I was going to restrict this to authors who are currently publishing, but then I thought about it and thought, no, Anthony Trollope is an auto-buy author. If I see a Trollope that I do not own yet, I will buy it because I know I'm probably going to like it. The same goes for Evie Dunmore. Even though I have read all 4 books in this series so far, I am desperately waiting to hear that she is publishing another book. She has just had a baby, so that might be a while, but I'm still looking forward to whenever that day comes. The same goes for Mimi Matthews. She also writes historical romances. Hers tend to be cleaner, if that matters to you, but they also tend to take place sometime during the 19th century and are beautifully done, cozy, sweet, believable, intriguing, just the perfect balance. And finally, D.E. Stevenson is another author where if I see one of her books at a book sale that I do not own, I will automatically buy it because chances are good I'm probably going to love it. 3, your 3 favorite genres. This was really hard to narrow down, but most of my reading tends to be an intersection, or at least have an element of one of these 3 topics. The first is historical. That tends to be the bulk of nonfiction I read. I love historical fiction. Classics for me have an element of the historical. Any plays I see tend to have some historical note to them, which then leads me into classics generally. I tend to love classic works. There are obviously those that I'm not going to like, but by and large, I am always intrigued by them, and they tend to be the book sale section that I visit most, along with regular fiction. And then thirdly, romance. I used to be quite snobby about romance as a genre and would never think of myself as a romance reader, but I've come around. Historical romance was my gateway, and I've discovered that yes, romance can be well done, and it doesn't have to be a guilty pleasure. Read what you love. 2, your 2 favorite places to read. Number 1 is the couch in our living room. That is my number 1 spot to read. However, for number 2, I would have to say anywhere by the water, be that poolside or at the beach. There's just something extra cozy of coming out of the water, lying in the sun, and reading something for a while, and enjoying the breeze and the quiet. I know most people would say bed. I have never been able to read in bed. I even bought myself one of those massive pillows to help you sit up in bed. It just doesn't work for me. Then 1 book you promise to read really, really soon. This applies to the entirety of my TBR, honestly, and I tend to get really overwhelmed when anyone asks me to look at my TBR and pick 1 book that I've been meaning to get to for ages. But recently, I've been inspired to maybe try and get to more Ildefonso Falcones books and read more in Spanish generally. I recently found Carla's channel. She is really sweet and lovely, and I will link her channel down below. But she also is a bilingual reader, and it's really inspired me to try and start reading more in Spanish again. So I have this monster of a book by Ildefonso Falcones. I read a translation of La Reina Descalza a few years ago, which is The Barefoot Queen in English. And I really, really loved it. So I really want to get to this one because it sounds so intriguing. He tends to write, I hesitate to say, Ken Follett-esque historical epics. This one, The Hand of Fatima, takes place in Cordoba, Spain, in what era? 1568. And it follows a young boy who is the product of an interfaith relationship. One of his parents was Muslim, the other was Christian. And in 1568, there are massive interfaith conflicts within Cordoba, which used to be a melting pot for the three Abrahamic religions. And this young man is off on an adventure to both find himself and figure out his place in that massive conflict. I loved Cordoba as a city and its reputation as a melting pot when I lived in Spain, so I'd be really fascinated to learn more about its history from a sort of insider's perspective. I am, however, very intimidated by its size and the fact that historical fiction in Spanish for me is very difficult to read because it tends to use language and vocabulary that I don't have to know. I don't have to use it on a regular basis. Like lantern or ostler. I don't have to know those words in everyday conversation. So it tends to be slightly more of a challenge. So there is the 54321 book tag. I am not going to tag anyone else to do this because you know me, I hate doing that. But if you would also like to do this book tag, please do so. Feel free to borrow these questions, which I will also leave down below, along with a list of the books and authors that I mentioned. Let me know down below some of your favorite places to read, your current 5-star reads so far, answers to any of the questions, whether or not you plan on doing this tag. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.